Okay, so we are live. Welcome to this week's episode of Startup Weekly. This week, I'm joined by Aashni Shah, who is the founder of Hypedocs, a platform for tracking achievements and beating imposter syndrome. As well as this, Aashni also works on a whole host of other initiatives, including a nonprofit, and she's always keeping busy as we've gotten to know already from our previous conversations, Aashni. So, thank you very much for joining us. You're very welcome. And how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. Yes, I always make a joke of if I'm an extremist where I will either be super busy or I'm on the couch watching Netflix for 3 days straight. And so I'd rather be on the productive end of that scale.
Amazing, amazing. Well, hopefully this is the productive end that we have here, and we're going to get some insights. Absolutely. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining. And maybe just by way of introduction, can you tell us a little bit about your background? And I know you've got an extensive career in tech and software, and then maybe how that led into some of the stuff that you're doing now, and in particular, how Hypedocs was kind of birthed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually born and grew up in Kenya, and it's a place I still call home. My family is all back there. I actually moved over to Toronto in 2011, where I studied computer science at the University of Toronto. And while I was in school, I did some internships. So that was actually my first experience working in the tech industry.
Mhm.
My general sort of like shout out or piece of advice there is start getting internships as early as you can and try and get a variety. So don't just do like the big tech companies, do a mix of small and big companies so you can figure out where your happy spot is because everyone's got a different one.
Mhm.
And then after graduating, I ended up joining Microsoft in Vancouver and loved living in the city. However, my time at Microsoft was not my favorite. And a lot of that sort of led down this path of me losing a lot of my personal confidence, which was a big thing for me because up until that point, I'd always been a very active person, a very confident person. And seeing me lose that and knowing that that's happening to thousands or millions potentially of women who work in the tech industry or any other industry was pretty heartbreaking because I was
Mhm.
experiencing it firsthand. And I was really fortunate to have a support group around me that when they knew what was happening, they had my back 100%.
Mhm.
So I eventually left the company and joined Square. And this time I moved over to Kitchener-Waterloo. And it was one of those like night and day type experiences where my time at Square was just filled with positivity, filled with really great, amazing people who did a lot to like lift me up and gain. And I honestly feel like I gained back a lot of my confidence.
Mhm.
One of the things that I did at Square was they introduced this concept of Hypedocs to me. And so this is something that believe it was a group of women at Square who came up with the original idea.
Mhm.
And it's literally just write down the things that you're working on every couple of days or every week or 2 weeks. And when it comes to evaluation time, which we did once a year at Square, you have this like massive bank of things that you can call back on, and that's a better way for you to write your self-evaluation without all of those feelings of imposter syndrome and like feeling like you're boasting or you're not sure where that line is when you're writing a self-evaluation. And about a year ago, I ended up leaving Square so I could move back to Toronto, and was a really tough decision because I honestly love the company. And I mean, look at what the stuff that they're doing today. Like
Mhm.
it is a
Lots of
great.
innovation, yeah, cutting edge.
Exactly. Like they've thrived in the in COVID times, but not in like the let's totally take advantage of everyone kind of way. So
Mhm.
I'm really proud of the company. And so I kept the concept of hype docs with me. I still update mine quite regularly.
Mhm.
And then I was in the process of job hunting as COVID hit, and ended up going back home for a few months. And by a few, I mean 8 months. We thought it was 2 weeks, it was 8 months.
Mhm.
And in that time, I ended up doing a bit of contract work, but then I kind of just decided, you know what, I'm more interested, and my end goal has always been to launch my own thing. So let's explore what that looks like. And I originally started building Talanga, which is the other company that I've been working on, and that's on personal privacy and how to securely store and share personal documents like your passport. But there was one random weekend where I was just feeling really inspired by some communities I was part of, and I think in 4 days I built the first version of Hypedocs, launched it, got a couple of paying customers, and was like, oh crap, okay, I actually have to build this properly now. But I think for me, it was more of, inspiration around still hearing that same message that a lot of women, especially because I speak to a lot of women in the founding communities I'm part of, just hearing a lot of them facing the same kind of imposter syndrome issues and facing that same sort of goal setting style issues. And a part of it was also I needed a way to reignite my love for Hypedocs, because at this point I was doing it on my own, whereas at Square I was doing it with a group of people. And so that's kind of how it led to me restarting Hypedocs and then launching Hypedocs as a product.
Amazing, yeah. So it seems like there's a lot of personal. It's come about because of, I guess, a lot of personal interests, and then combining that with your kind of natural skill sets in software and your previous experience has now birthed this new platform and something you managed to validate pretty quickly. So can you maybe just explain a little bit more, like what someone can get out of it? And I guess maybe you've probably explored some of the psychology behind why tracking and measuring your objectives and all of that sort of stuff is important, especially like from a reflection point of view as well, like you said. So what were the real or maybe what's some of the psychology behind it? Because I'm interested to learn about maybe why that is such a big part.
I'm putting a massive asterisk if I'm not a psychologist, so don't take anything I say as gospel. I think, so one of the ways that I talk about Hypedocs is it's not necessarily about goal setting or goal tracking, though that is a component of it. It's more just normalizing the idea of celebrating yourself and celebrating your wins. And a big part of why I think that distinction is important is society today is very good at focusing on our negatives, focusing on our mistakes. And we do an excellent job of tearing each other down on a regular basis. I mean, if you look at some of the popular TV shows, that's exactly what people are doing. These are the reality TV shows. And it's literally just a bunch of people tearing each other down whenever they have the opportunity. But what if we reverse that script, right? What if we, instead of focusing on all the negatives, we actually started focusing on ourselves and our positives and the things that we have accomplished and are good at doing. And that, I think, is one of the big sort of psychological things that I think for me has been really, really empowering. And there's so many different theories around this. Like there's the power of positive thinking. I think there's that entire book called The Secret, which is all about this sort of concept. And then taking it a little bit more into that goal setting approach, there's that concept of if you are constantly writing things down, right? So this is like the idea of a vision board, or just having like a quote of, your one big goal and having it on a wall that you often see every day in your home. It's that same idea where if you're constantly writing things down, they end up staying more top of your mind. If you're constantly reading them, they stay top of your mind rather than the negatives and the mistakes. And so it's sort of combining these two concepts together. And more than that, I don't know if I can say anything like definitively without doing any psychological studies, but I think that's a large part of where some of this stuff comes from.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess stepping on from that, I know you've built it with regards to trying to help women and women in tech in particular. And I guess from a business perspective, have you found that it is mainly women that have been using it, or have you found that there's another kind of ideal customer that has picked up on your products that maybe you didn't otherwise think? Because I think it's always interesting to think about. Oftentimes as an entrepreneur or people who are building projects will build things with a certain ideal customer in mind and then realize that, oh no, there's actually this other cohort of people that can benefit from this as well. So what's been your experience on that front?
Yeah, so I think from day one, I've always said that this is a product for everyone, because I know firsthand, or secondhand technically, because I'm not a guy, but I speak to a lot of my male friends about this, that a lot of men have imposter syndrome as well. And so the intention of this product has never been to single out one category of people, but rather my marketing efforts and the group of people that I know are A, most aware, and B, more willing to spend money on tools and products like this are women. Men are willing to spend money, but it's a much smaller percentage that are willing to admit I have imposter syndrome, and then from there, work to try and better that. That being said, there's quite a few different coaching style programs that I've seen. One that came out of the On Deck Fellowship is a company called Sail that is specifically targeting mentorship and like mental health as a product or as like a coaching style program for men. And so I know that there's definitely a space and an opportunity to broadcast it and sell it to them. I've actually had quite a few men reach out to me, and these are like former coworkers and colleagues who reached out to me and said, I love the concept of Hypedocs. I actually do this with my personal coach or my life coach. And they've encouraged me to do it. And I know the benefits, and I know so many more people will benefit with your product. That being said, I think one of the things I've learned from the startup world and the startup life is you have to have that one specific target user in mind. And because I'm still very early on, I need to very specifically focus on that target user. Otherwise, I'm going to be trying to sell to like way too many groups. And for now, or like originally, my target user was just women are the easiest group for me to sell to. It's one that I definitely, what's the word? It's one that I definitely connect with. But what I realized there is there's so many different ways that you can categorize women and by extension, underrepresented minorities. And there's this whole section of students, especially in 2020, like students looking for jobs, students who've just graduated. There's so many that need this kind of support. But unfortunately, more likely than not, they're not the group that can actually pay for this, or they're not willing to pay for it. And then the other end of that is when you're looking at women who are already in the industry, are they going to pay for it, or is it something that they're going to try and get their company to pay for instead? And so my original model was more of a B2C, let me sell individually to women and try to encourage them to get on board. But what it's actually shifted to more is let me find or let me partner with coaches, let me partner with potentially businesses, and let me partner with schools. I haven't talked to many schools or any schools yet, but so that might be a bit more of a pipe dream. But let me do this more as a B2B2C product where I'm selling to those groups or those organizations, and they could effectively bulk buy registrations for their employees or students or whatever their clients, and they can use it that way. And so that's definitely changed the way that I'm having conversations and who I'm targeting with my initial pitch and sell. But the end user, I think, has largely stayed the same, which is women, underrepresented minorities, with a little focus on tech, just because that's a space that I know a lot more comfortably. And when I talk about or when I pitch the product, I can make very quick, very easy pinpoints of this is who I am, this is my past, this is why I found this helpful, and here's a little bit of data and stats around it. And a lot of that just comes straight from the tech industry.
Yeah, that move is an interesting one because I think it's similar to kind of a lot of businesses and an approach that we're trying to take with Startup Sanctuary as well, looking at going B2C and trying to find customers that route, and then realizing that there are other potentials for whether it's a strategic partnership or getting people who want to upskill in a certain area, and realizing that there's a whole other type of demographic that is available here through a B2B model. But it doesn't mean that you have to rule out your initial user base, but there's potentials that you didn't otherwise think of maybe when you went down the B2C route. I think
yeah, I was just going to add, I think it's not that I'm ruling out my original group. It's just I'm finding a better, faster way to grow and scale it. Because ideally these B2Bs that I'm connecting with, it's more a B2B2C connection. And that C part is still the same group. But ideally these are the folks that need it most. And ideally they're not the ones who are paying for it. It's like their company is paying for it, or programs are already involved with their paying for it, which I think is even more powerful.
Yeah, and it's like a win-win because the company has budget for it, and then you're looking for customers to get initial traction. And I think as with any early stage business, you need to stay alive in the early stages. So it sounds like a win-win for everyone involved there. Can you take us through maybe an example of what someone would use Hypedocs to track, and maybe what does the user journey look like for someone who comes in contact with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you set up your account and everything. Not a lot of details are getting collected there. It's pretty basic. And then from there, the whole idea is you literally hit the add button, fill out a form that has 3 questions on it, which is what's the name, what's the description, and then pick a category that this is related to. In the near future, I'm actually planning to add a struggles section to it. So, this is the achievement that you made. What were some of the struggles or things you had to overcome in order to achieve it? And then also potentially including like a goal setting component to it, where you can set your own goals. Like, I want to get a new job. And then when you go and create entries, you can map it to this goal, or that goal in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And so an example that I submitted recently is, I did the, you and I were talking about this before the call started. Yesterday, I was fortunate enough to be part of a live interview, Instagram live interview.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an example of something I would put in there. And then once I get links to like the YouTube link or any of those things, I can always pull it and push it onto my, or like include that in the hype event that I'm creating.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I hit submit, this nifty little thing that I added in that I really adore is confetti actually shoots out at you on the page,
Mm-hmm.
which is not a big thing, but it's the thing that gives you joy. And it's all about, it goes back to this core concept of we want to celebrate the things that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's basically how you just continue to add entries. And that's the base version of the product. But from there, it sort of sets off a whole bunch of different things in motion. For example, every week we send out an email to all of our users saying, hey, remember that time 6 months ago that you hiked or you summited Mount Everest? Whatever you're doing this week, you've got it. And it's more of a, like your past self is reminding you of things that you've done and things you've already accomplished, so that your future or your present and future self are able to keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. And we also recently launched this concept called Hypepods. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of hype in all the names, so I may need to factor that out. But Hypepods, and these are effectively like accountability groups where you are in a group with 4 to 10 other folks, and you meet every 2 weeks. You have 10 minutes of quiet time at the start where everyone updates their Hypedocs, and this is just focused time. It kind of centers you, so you're more focused on like this call rather than thinking about the 20 emails you need to reply to. Mm-hmm. And it also, sort of ensures that you're updating your Hypedoc, because that's a key component to like these emails and everything else that's going out. And the remaining time in these calls, you go around and everyone shares a win, they share a struggle, they share their goals, and it's becoming quite an empowering community where, if I'm sharing a struggle that like I feel like I have imposter syndrome when I need to talk to my manager about my promotion, the people in this call are ideally, recalling things that I've already said that I've done in the past, and just being like, okay, you might have that issue, but bear in mind that you have done 3 times the amount of work of anyone else on your team. You're already operating at, that promotion level or whatever it is. And I think that's a big key component to like making the Hypedocs, making that work or making it work long term, is just that ability that you have these group of people that you're building these connections with. And then a couple of features that aren't launched yet and will hopefully be launched in the near future are the goal setting portion that I mentioned, and then a public component to it. I'm still figuring out some of the mechanics of how public posts would work. Mm-hmm. But ideally you could go to like hypedocs.co/Gordon and you could see all of the amazing, impressive things that Gordon has decided to share publicly. So then for you, you still have that public and private set of features that you care about as well.
Yeah, awesome. I think, the accountability part that you mentioned is, I think, super important for early stage product builders as well, because just having that group and that network is so imperative for early stage building, even from like an accountability standpoint, but also from like a product feedback perspective, or being able to iterate on your product. And I'm sure you know all about this from building products and software engineering and getting feedback loops and kickstarting all of that. But I think it sounds like you're prospering and you're trying to foster that type of environment with everyone who's joining those Hypepod calls.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the reasons that I really want to make the Hypepod concept work is when I started in May, when I started sort of focusing more full time on actually just doing my own thing, I created my own accountability group with a few friends. And that accountability group, I mean, if you look at the success of that accountability group today, it's pretty amazing. And they're a big part of why I actually managed to push through some of the rougher times in the last few months. And it also kind of held me accountable of like, oh, you know what, I don't have anything to update this week. I better get something done on Tuesday right before our call on Wednesday, which is not the right way to think about it, but it was enough of a forcing function that I made sure I focused on continuing to do the work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, what has been your main approach to growth so far? Because growth being the operative word for any early stage startup, I think. And I know people talk about growth hacking and different ways of marketing and all of that. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think it comes back to building solid relationships, and it sounds like you're doing that. But can you shed light on maybe what's worked for you from a growth perspective, and some of the approaches that you would recommend for others?
Yes, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer this because I'm still struggling with that part. That's actually the thing that I'm trying to focus on more these days. Because I'm a software engineer by nature, my sort of initial problem solving solution or my initial like strategy with this is let me just build things and then the rest will happen naturally, which is obviously not how it happens. You have to put a lot of time and energy into figuring out who are the target customers, where are they, and how can I reach them wherever they are. And so that's what I've been spending a lot more time in the last couple of weeks doing, is actually sort of, you know, putting my hands away or pulling my hands away from the keyboard and the code and leveraging that to somebody else on the team, and trying to dig into or focus a lot more on how can I grow this and how can I scale this. And a lot of that has ended up in the B2B2C model around this is the better, faster way for me to scale this up and to grow this. I think a lot of it has just been, so I've actually in the last week gotten 2 customers that are interested in bulk buying accounts for a year for their respective clients or customers, or without saying too much about who they are. And both those connections came because I've been talking about my product in different calls and events that I'm part of. I've been talking about it in what's it called? A pitch competition that I was in for Tonga. I still mention Hypedocs, and I make sure I throw in a 1-liner or 2-liner in it. And a couple of folks have exactly. It's those little subtle promotions, and that's actually a tricky thing that I struggle with sometimes. Is, you know, if I'm here for a specific event, am I here as a representative of Tonga, of Hypedocs, of my nonprofit, or am I just like Aashni Shah, a person that's like trying to blend into the background for a change, which I do every now and then. And so that's actually how I got some of these early customers, is because I'm working on 2 very different products. I can go and talk about Tonga in a space that cares about privacy, or with a group of people that care about privacy, but I can slip in that little note about Hypedocs in there, and it'll trigger in some people's minds. And that way, like, I'm still getting work done on both sides, but it kind of has that viral loop of coming back and just being like, hey, I remember you talking about this. I'd love to know more. And I now have 2 customers from that, or 2 of the like B2B2C type customers.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've been doing is, and this is kind of just something that I've always enjoyed doing and spend a lot of time doing anyway, is focusing on women in tech groups. It's who I sort of, it's what I connect with personally, and it's a group that, or there are many different types of groups out there, even within the women in tech category. There's like local ones, so like a Women in Tech Toronto one, and then there's like, I don't know, there's probably 30 different ones that I know of off the top of my head. And they're fairly active, and they're all with groups of people that need tools like this. And so some of my earlier strategies, which I don't think I implemented them as well as I could have, but some of the earlier strategies were definitely around posting in those groups. I think a better way to do it, just, you know, so you don't come across too spammy, is asking questions around like, hey, who suffers from imposter syndrome, and what kind of tools do you use for it? And then sort of reaching out to the folks that respond and sharing a little bit more about Hypedocs. That way they can organically start posting about it as well. So those are some of the things I did in the past with like varying levels of success. I think a lot more of my focus now is relying a lot more on the warm intros for the B2B2C component. And something I've been finding, which is pretty amazing is the women, the two clients that I got, the women, they're both women, and they're both more than willing to introduce me to other women or other folks that care about the D&I initiatives at companies. So it's almost one of those, like, once you get into a couple of these different groups and loops, that introduction cycle becomes extremely powerful as well.
Absolutely, yeah. The power of word of mouth marketing from there on, yeah.
Exactly.
Amazing. So can you explain, or not explain, but maybe let's look at some of the larger trends that you might be seeing. And I think you probably have a good insight on this because you're a software developer, engineer by trade. And I think you've probably noted the likes of the no-code movement at the moment, being able to democratize the ability for people to build things. But maybe what are some other trends that you're seeing in a general sense for building businesses and products online that that you see? And maybe you're obviously trying to capitalize on some of them with some of the stuff that you're building, but I'm intrigued to hear what you see going on from your perspective, and
Yeah.
how you might be capitalizing.
Yeah, I think no-code tools are some of the most powerful tools I've ever seen, to be honest. And I don't know if I officially said this before, but I'm part of the On Deck Fellowship program, which is actually where I got exposed to this concept of no-code tools and prototyping with no-code tools. I think that's probably the biggest trend right now, is if you're able to build a product, or if you have an idea for a product, instead of doing what I do, which is spending 5 days or 10 days coding your initial MVP, why don't you just figure out a really low code or no code solution to it? And with all the different things you can do with Zapier and Integromat, it's actually really powerful. I finally managed to play around with no code tools a week ago, where I built what I call it BCC Me, which is, it's effectively a double opt-in intro bot, because I do a lot of introductions all the time. So this way it kind of just deals with it all for me, and then I can actually track the types of introductions I'm making. And I did that all using no code tools. I think it took me all of 5 hours to build an MVP that works pretty well, which is incredible, because as a developer, it would probably take me at least 20 or 30 to get some of the like connections and stuff in place. So no code tools, 100%. I think the way that people are thinking about building teams has changed a lot. A huge part of that is due to the pandemic and the work from home culture. I think remote workers has become a really big thing right now. And that's really exciting, because you can now hire folks from just about anywhere in the world. And that opens up the opportunity and the access pool in a really big way. I'm seeing so many different trends around the types of products that are getting built. You still have, honestly, you have everything getting built today. You have a combination of those old school fart apps, which originally came out when when the iPhone App Store originally launched. And then you have some really cool technology being built today. Like there's a big focus on the future of work, especially because of the pandemic. There's a ton of products in the education space, in the crypto space. MedTech is obviously blowing up like crazy right now. And then there's some really cool stuff coming out in the clean tech space, and you know, how to try and save our planet, which I think is really exciting. And so I think some of the trends that I'm seeing there are, you have almost two different groups of people. You have the groups of people that are non-technical, and some technical folks are kind of throwing themselves into it as well, where they're using no-code tools to build out early prototypes. And once they've got that product market fit or that traction, or like they can say, hey, we're pretty confident that this is the right way to go about it, then they can start hiring developers. And the most amazing thing about this is it's completely unblocked a lot of people from entering the space. Yeah. And now that you have more folks that aren't engineers building things from the ground up, you actually have so many more interesting ideas that are coming out. And I think one of the other things that I'm noticing is there is a certain amount of trust that goes into these products. There's a certain amount of like expectation around the quality of your product. You can't just launch something. It has to meet certain standards from a design perspective. It has to meet certain standards from a security perspective. Privacy is not quite there yet. I'm hoping that we swing more into the privacy front in the near future, because that's still a work in progress. But it's really encouraging to see that there are standards that are starting to get set in the industry. And then there's also a lot of old school structures that are getting broken down, which I think personally excites me a lot. And those are things like these like the neobank concepts, or like the alternate ways to have like a digital bank on your phone rather than your traditional bank that that costs you $40 a month just to store your money or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, even just over the past few months, and it ties in with some of the stuff you spoke about, but there's just so much stuff being built, like from every angle, and no code is helping to accelerate that, as well as some of the other trends that you mentioned. And I think there's so much growth going on. It's great to see the competition as well as the growth, because I think they kind of inspire one another going hand in hand.
Yeah, totally. I also think there's, especially in a couple of different industries, you have some products that are absolutely brand new. There's nothing like it that's coming out, and they're growing from a virality perspective, especially in like the D2C space. And then you have some in the more traditional spaces, like in the medtech space. And what was the other one I was going to mention? To some extent, the future of work. But a couple of other categories where there's a lot of products that are getting built right now, and it's almost you have to take a bet and see which of the 30 products that are getting built across the world is actually going to survive, and which one's going to be the next Google of future of work, or the next Salesforce of medtech, or whatever it is. So it's almost like you're seeing the birth of 30, 40, 50 companies, many of which are overlapping or have overlapping features. And some will unfortunately burn out, or just not figure out how to run themselves as a business. I hope that's not me. And then others are, already profitable, like sort of out of the gate, but will they be able to sustain it? So it's almost, and I'm a huge TV show fan from like the Survivor Amazing Race perspective. It's almost like, because I'm watching, because I'm friends with and watching a lot of the founders that are building these companies, it's almost like I get to have my own version of Amazing Race with these startups that are growing, and I'm obviously rooting for them all to succeed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I like that point you mentioned, because some of the stuff that's being birthed now they'll go on to create entire ecosystems all around them, like a Salesforce or a Google or whatever. And I think a lot of people maybe who are starting other businesses or working in other companies will evolve into aiding the growth of those ecosystems, whether it's through like bolt-on apps or whatever. I think Zapier is a good example, or some other businesses that are just building out big ecosystems in that way. So yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see how it materializes. And I like your analogy.
Yeah, I mean, Airtable is just, the amount of stuff that Airtable's done this year alone is incredible to actually watch that. And I've only recently been converted over to using Airtable more, but because I was a heavy Google or like Google Sheets user. But to see Airtable grow the way it did, and now you're seeing Google come back and be like, no, we're going to create our own app script engine and everything, and it's going to be better. We'll see. Hopefully Google doesn't end up killing out Zapier, which I think, or Airtable, which I think is a hard one at this point. But if they competed against them much earlier on, Google probably would have, or they would have tried to buy them out.
Absolutely. It's crazy. Airtable is a great example. And I think a few of those other no-code tools are just going crazy growth over the past 8 to 12 months in particular. So Aashni, I have to ask more the kind of personal stuff as well, because you're obviously a very motivated individual, and building your own businesses is never an easy endeavor. So I guess, what is it that you love most about what you do, and what's really inspired you to go down the entrepreneurial route?
So I'll answer the second question first. I think from a young age, and from growing up the way I did, which is watching my dad and his two brothers grow out more companies than I could even name, that entrepreneurial spirit's kind of just always been in my blood. And even from a young age, while I wasn't necessarily running a business, I've always been doing multiple things at once. So I was always in school, and I think in high school I was in like 4 or 5 different clubs, but not just like in the clubs, I was in like the leadership roles in all of the clubs. And that carried on into university, where I started U of T Hacks. So that's the first Canadian student hackathon, and a few other things that I've done. And it's almost like those are just fun ways for me to explore these different skills that I need to grow, like leadership, like organization management. With UFD Hacks, it was a lot of how are we going to raise the funds so that we can keep this event free for our students.
Mhm.
And so that entrepreneurial spirit has kind of always been there, and it's from watching people that inspire me, like my dad. And then I'm trying to remember your second question. What kind of like pushes me forward?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and what do you love most about
Yes.
that pursuit?
Yeah. So I think the other part is from a very young age, I've always been taught that, or I've always been very fortunate. Our family's been very fortunate, and a big mantra for us is to give back whenever and wherever we can. And that's something that my grandparents on both sides have taught me. That's something that my family, my immediate family, my extended family have always been very proud of. And as I started moving into the tech industry, which in earlier days was not really focused on like how can we there wasn't like as immediate of a focus of like let's build a better tomorrow. That's sort of become my mission. And it's we were talking earlier about if you write things down or if you put them somewhere public, it sticks with you. I've actually put I'm on a mission to build a better tomorrow as my mantra on Twitter, and or as my bio on Twitter and part of my email signature, specifically to remind me like the decisions I'm making today and the products that I want to work on, or the companies that I work at. And Square is a perfect example of this. I want to work at places or build companies that are building a better tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the thing that makes me extremely happy today, despite the fact that I'm definitely not making anywhere near as much money as I was as a software engineer yet, is I get to work on and build things that I'm passionate about and that I really truly believe can make the lives better for my users. And I think that to me is extremely empowering and uplifting, and hopefully it will turn a profit in the next couple of months. But if not, I know that I've grown a really powerful set of skills that I can now use anywhere else as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think if the more you stick at it, I'm sure the more profitable it will be, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time as well. But in light of wanting to build a better tomorrow, what is next for Hypedocs, and what's on the roadmap over the next couple of months?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more just growth in terms of how many more users can we get on board. The 2 or 3 features I mentioned to you are kind of the big ones that I want to focus on. And then figuring out how to build in viral loops and focus on retention. Because I want to make sure that the early users we're getting are folks that actually do want to stay on. And I think there's like that concept of build a product that your first 100 users love. And if they love it, then it's going to grow from there. Like they're going to sell it for you. So that's something that I need to focus a lot more on, because right now I definitely haven't hit that. And I think one of my big goals for Hypedocs is, once I build out some of those additional features, that's kind of what I had in mind for Hypedocs. And I'm curious to see the type of feedback I get from my users around what else they'd like to see, and almost let the users and the early users dictate the direction that it takes moving forward. And I think like one other part to that is I've already gotten a little bit of feedback around this would be great as a mobile app. And I'm like, yeah, it would. Mobile apps are a lot harder to build than a website, at least for me. So I'm not going to commit to building a mobile app just yet. I want to see like what parts of this are working. And then if we do build out a mobile app, is it the full experience, like the hype pods and all of that as well? Or is it just purely a screen where you can go and add things and view things whenever you need them? And, like the mobile app should be complementary to everything else that we're providing on the platform.
Yeah, totally. I feel you on the mobile app development front there. I think, people sometimes think that it's very simple to go and build it on top, but it's a completely different ball game. So, that's amazing, and I'm sure you're going to be kept very busy with everything you have going on and all your other initiatives as well. So, if people want to check out Hypedocs, they can visit hypedocs.co, and you'll be greeted by Aashni and her amazing product. So Aashni, once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Amazing. You too, Gordon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, and best of luck with everything with Hypedocs.
Likewise. Bye.